Welcome to the January 24th, 2023 City Council work session. I will turn it over to City Manager Benda to walk us through the agenda overview.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. Good afternoon. Before you on your agenda today, there was a comment that Councilman Hegelson made last week when Lee Newland, our engineer, talked about pavement and roads and what have you. This time of year, it's not often warm enough to asphalts because they have to get to a certain temperature, and that causes emails to usually our city attorney about people who've driven through potholes that they've seen and causes certain things. And I thought kind of an important piece maybe for the newer members about how that practice works. So I have Clay here that's going to walk you through kind of asphalting and what that looks like on a year-to basis and how we work with VDOT and others to kind of make sure that as many resources as we can to make sure those roads that we have are smooth and navigable, because those are important for our folks. Then under business item briefings, remember business item briefing is styled as something that we brief you upon, and then later at a subsequent meeting or when time permits, we come back to you and then you have a vote on it. So business item briefing this evening, we have underneath an appropriation of fund balance from FY 2022 unexpended schools operating fund. And what that means annually since I think 1993, and you'll see there's a subsequent business item briefing here, the council has looked at year-end, call it return to fund balance, and schools usually positions those resources to help with capital improvement because the city owns the schools and the buildings that are there. And so tonight in your packet, there's at least a couple items that are described. Good news is we have Lynchburg City School staff here prepared and ready, so if you have questions about work that they intend or propose with those resources, they'll be able to kind of answer those questions. And then as a follow-up, there's a question I think as this annual thing comes forward, what's often maybe to discuss is this 1993 letter of agreement between Lynchburg City Council and Lynchburg City Schools about how this would operate. So I think we'll have Donna Witt that kind of explain maybe year to date how that has worked, what it looks like, and then we also have our city attorney that can maybe describe kind of a process or procedure if you want to discuss it more or maybe even consider doing something different. Then our last business item briefing is really a cleanup. If you don't know, we have a federal credit union, Lynchburg Municipal Employees. And if you've traveled near Hillcat Stadium, if you look there to the left, if you have the cemetery on your right, that's that building that's there. Well, 2019, our lease agreement lapsed, and we've been moving forward in what's a periodic tendency, and I just exercise that word because it's been a long time since I've been in law school. What it means is we move month to month, and so as a cleanup, tonight we're just asking you to renew the lease, and that we have a projected term, and there's an outlined calendar year as to how that works, right? Then you have something under, you have a provision under roll call, and then you also have a closed session. With that, Mayor, I turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Benda. Moving on to work session agenda item number 1, paving management using the pavement condition index data. Mr. Clay Simmons.
Mayor Reed, Vice Mayor Feraldi, members of council, good afternoon. I'm Clay Simmons. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Works here with the City of Lynchburg. Sort of get into this. So we're going to talk about how the city looks at our pavement condition assessments and makes decisions, as far as which streets are ready to pave versus which are not. Essentially, this is just an informational item. No decisions need to be made today. And again, it's just to go over our process for how we select roads for pavement or treatment. Currently, we've got just over 809 lay miles of roadway in the city. Most of our roads are asphalt composition with a certain amount that are historic stone and brick, as well as granite cobble. We do our pavement in 2 contracts per year, typically a spring and a fall, and it's largely what we call mill and fill operations. So that means we're milling off the old asphalt, usually 1 inch to 2, excuse me, and then coming back with 1.5 inches on top. There are other treatment options that are out there that are less expensive. You can get into pavement preservation, but generally speaking, the ride quality is not well accepted by the public. And when we have tried it, we have kind of paid the price. We've gotten a lot of complaints as a result of that, even though fiscally it is it's a better practice to try and pursue. So it is VDOT highway maintenance funded. The scale that we go by is essentially a 100 for top-end pavement, a 0 for the worst pavement you could get. VDOT has asked us to not resurface unless pavement has fallen down to a condition of 60 or less. I'm going to show you in some graphs and some other graphics here real quickly, kind of a pavement deterioration curve, which is what we've got on the right here. This is actually a fairly standard deterioration curve for most systems. A building, a road, a bridge will follow a similar deterioration path. The bar graph over on the left really, again, reflects kind of the color gradient that you're going to be seeing on the maps here in just a couple minutes. Up until 2015, this sort of work was done largely manually. We were doing windshield surveys. It was very staff intensive. It was also really subject to a lot of judgment calls and a lot of variability as a result, because it was almost 100% human effort. What we had moved to since 2015 is a completely automated system. This is the same system that VDOT is using on their roadways. It is a really high-tech van that goes around and measures a litany of criteria for each segment of the roadway, does a complete video inventory of the roadway at the same time. As a result, we've gotten really, really good, consistent, repeatable data out of this that happens in a really quick period of time, where it might have taken us weeks to months prior of staff time to try and generate this. The ARAN system can do this really in a matter of a couple of days if weather is decent. So it's looking at things like cracking, potholes, sort of the obvious, but it's also looking at, you know, the ride quality. It has geosensors inside that are measuring the vibrations of the road as you drive over it. It's also looking at oxidation, and it can actually count the amount of patches that are on any one segment of road. Using all of that data into a fairly complex equation, it spits out what we call the pavement condition index. And again, just like in school, 100's great, 0's awful, and we're shooting for something above a 60 typically for city roads, or else it needs some other form of treatment. So moving on, this is a couple of samples of the data that we can pull from this. The data is ported into our GIS system. We can then bind that to the city's roadway geometries and come up with a map that essentially shows a graded level by color for each city maintained street segment within our network. One of the things that we get out of this that you don't typically get out of doing things in a manual way is we can understand the failure mode of the pavement. That can help us look back on what treatments were done previously, what overlay, what asphalt mix did we use in the past, was it the right thing, and what should we do moving forward. We're also looking at coming in with an update here in 2023. It's about time to reproduce that data. We have data sets from 2015 and 2018 that were collected on a timeline that VDOT was actually also collecting the same data, and so we were able to just piggyback onto their contractor and work with them. We'll explore that option again, hopefully as a money-saving effort. If not, we'll go out for bid and do an RFP for that process. One of the other things that we get out of this over time is that initial deterioration curve that I showed you. It can be custom for each particular locality. We want to see how our networks are aging. Typically, you're looking at about a 2-point drop per year. So if a roadway starts off at an 80, within 10 years, it's going to be a 70. And actually, I think I just messed myself up on the math. Anyways, a 2-point drop per year, so you lose about 20 points in 10 years. Moving on, really, so some of the limiting factors that we have in this are, of course, budget. That's also affected by construction and materials costs. We have seen since 2017 approximately a 28% increase in our pavement expenses. It's all indexed to oil, price of oil. Contractor availability is also an issue. We really only have 2 paving contractors in the Lynchburg area that seem to ever bid on our projects. They're busy, and we are kind of competing with VDOT's efforts at the same time that we're trying to get our roadways paved. And so they end up falling behind on the paving lists, and things just kind of roll from there as far as delays. There are also delays due to upcoming projects and utility work. We put out a list of roadways, kind of a target list based on what we've seen in the data and then what we have confirmed by going out and visually looking at the roads, that we send around to all of our partners, our stakeholders. So utilities, the gas companies, and all those folks have input into those paving lists and will tell us, well, wait a minute, we've got work that needs to be done here. Don't come and pave the road until after we're finished. Those types of efforts are also contractor limited these days. And so it, again, just some delays and backups can result. On the good side of that, those same projects that can delay us can also be an asset. If we've got a really large utility project that's coming through that's going to significantly impact a roadway, that same project can assist in the funding to getting that roadway repaved and put back into essentially a new condition. We do also have VDOT funding grants that we pursue when we get opportunity. We've got states of good repair money as well as primary extension paving money that we take advantage of annually and apply for those at every opportunity that's ahead of us. So, and with that, that's how we put together our pavement lists.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Do I have any questions from council?
Comment.
Councilman Hutchinson?
I know you said there are a lot of limiting factors, and so sometimes it may take a long time. So in some of the concerns that you had listed, such as potholes and patches and whatnot, some of those, I know there's new technology that always comes out, and there's the stuff that I was able to see firsthand that works fantastic is that road soup, where you can actually just pack it in with your feet. You drive over it, and it sets with the bonding. Lots of these potholes, especially when we're waiting, I think the city may have even bought a couple pallets or something of it. Hopefully that's something that we can use, one, that saves a lot of money, because you can repair these potholes and patches. Obviously, it's not for, wholesale repaving, but it can fix these holes that are causing concerns for citizens that we hear from, for their alignment in their car and whatnot, and something that can be fixed, and it actually has a really long record of it. Have you been able to use any of that in fixing the potholes? And
Yes, sir. So that's generally cold patch, and typically we use that in the wintertime when the asphalt plants aren't open. One of the things that we've noticed on your higher volume roadways is that it doesn't seem to hold up as well, and it will pop back out somewhat quickly. So we will go in the wintertime as an effort to try and safe something up, but typically we come back in the summertime and really look at those for a permanent replacement with hot mix asphalt.
And I think maybe it's a different one. I mean, because this stuff I know they use on runways, up at Dulles. I mean, so I think Dulles has typically, the big 747s are fairly heavy compared to, cars.
Enough.
So,
right.
And they do have more of a permanent bond as opposed to just a popping up. So maybe that's something to explore, especially when you're waiting on the contractors. You put a bag or two in and you're good for at least helping that area, rather than as you wait to improve the entire road, with the entire, fixing of it. At least you can actually fix the portion, especially when it gets some deterioration. So
we can certainly look into that. I can reach out to the airport authority and see what they might be aware of, and certainly look into it.
thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Hutchinson. Anyone else? No?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Okay, moving on to our business item briefings. We are going on to agenda item number 2, appropriation of fund balance from fiscal year 2022, unexpended schools operating fund. This item will appear before council for action on February 14th, 2023. Ms. Donna Witt.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So this action is requested in accordance with an agreement that's dated December 14th, 1993, signed by the Lynchburg City Council and the Lynchburg City School Board. So this agreement that is dated in 1993, it provides for the creation and maintenance of a school's operating fund balance for the purpose of underwriting any occasional shortfalls from the various budgetary categories of direct state funding support, as well as other applications, all based upon the required expenditures approval of the school board. But it was set up in place so that the school boards could react very conservatively fiscally, so they weren't trying to expend their whole budget, so that they could be conservative. If there was funds left, council agreed that it could be returned to them. So in the history, the funds that are returned they must be used for one-time expenditures. Now, some of the things that they've used these funds for in the past have been maintenance and repairs to school buildings, including the HVAC systems, the roofs, all kinds of things. And create and increase a reserve for health insurance claims. They've also created and increased a textbook reserve. They've addressed security concerns, and they also replaced the telephone system. So it has been one-time expenditures that have helped the schools when possibly other funds wouldn't have been available. So the expected action, a request was submitted by letter to the city manager dated December 9th, 2022, for the use of the 22 schools fund balance. And then the city school board approved and submitted, or approved this list at the December 6th school board meeting. So and the way this is calculated, at the end of the fiscal year, when our external audits are done by Brown Edwards, this number is calculated. So they look at all kinds of things in this calculation, but it's basically budget related to actual. So within this request this year, it's for $1,099,856. So part of this request is a security vestibule installation of $260,000 in Darrington Elementary, Hutcherson Early Learning Center, Paul Monroe Elementary, and Dunbar Middle. There's also a request for $749,856 for R.S. Payne structural and building envelope repair, and $90,000 for structural analysis and repair at Heritage Elementary, Lincoln Elementary, and Perrymont Elementary. Now, I got this wrong because this got moved and I forgot to change the slide, so I apologize. But as the mayor said, the first reading will be February 14th. To appropriate funds, it does take 2 readings, so the second reading will be at your next meeting on February 28th. And just a bit of additional information, I went back and looked at the last 13 years. So if you look at the last 10 years, the average return of fund balance is about $2.5 million. And if you look at the last 5 years, it's about $3.2 million. But generally, this has been used for maintenance on the school buildings or to place in reserves for future use. And just so you have those numbers, and the reserves are actually on the city's books. So for the textbook reserve, there's $2.2 million. And for health insurance, and we also have a health insurance reserve so that if our claims, something happens and they go out of control one year, we do have these funds set aside to help pay for our claims. For the school, that number is just over $2 million. And then they have $321,000 in a reserve for special education. So, happy to answer any questions if I can. And also, school is represented here, as the city manager said. If you have any specific questions about these projects, I'm not the one to answer that.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Any questions? Vice Mayor Ferralli?
Would it be possible to get information about the RS Payne structural and building envelope repair? What that looks like?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see everybody. So our RS Payne building envelope repair project, if I can just maybe start a little bit before that. So our process that we've been going through for our CIP development over the last couple of years now that we've been working through our facility assessment and all those sorts of things is to really sort of methodically think through how we make sure that our buildings are as stable, first of all, safe, and then as stable as we possibly can for our families and our children. So at RS Payne, one of the issues that we have is that we have a significant amount of water infiltration into the structure. So Lynchburg City Schools has, over the last 5 or 6 years, maybe a little bit more, has done an outstanding job of replacing roofs throughout the division. I think most of our roofs are pretty new, within 5 years. But we do have what we call exterior envelope. So this would be the masonry around the building, the sort of part between the bricks, right, is sort of coming out in a lot of our buildings, as well as other sort of masonry issues that are there. And so at RS Payne, we want to address some of those issues around the building to try to address the significant amount of water infiltration. So I do have a couple of photos, and I know I learned better from Mr. Benda than to provide it at the meeting, but I do have these for you, and I can share this with you really quickly just to show you what these look like. There are 4 photographs, and I gave mine away. I'm sorry, but sorry about that. So there are 4 photographs that give you an idea of the condition within the building. This is not related to the water issues we had over winter break. This is related to when it rains inside oftentimes at RS Payne. So this first picture, the first 2 pictures are in the gymnasium. This has been an issue for a number of years where water is infiltrating through the masonry, which is it just needs to be repaired. It needs to be replaced throughout the building. You can see that water damage that causes concerns, obviously, about just the structure of the building and making sure that it's safe and secure, as well as issues like mold and that sort of thing. The second set of pictures are within the auditorium. So if you've been in RS Payne, you know that there is a beautiful historic auditorium that has been very historic and meaningful to our community for a long time. And you can see, and I think really the one on the back page is really this photo that really speaks to the condition of where we are right now. And I would suggest that in order to make sure that we frankly don't get this building to the point where it's beyond repair, we need to invest in making sure that, again, that water infiltration sort of ends. Sometimes when you talk about building repair, building envelope, you also talk about windows, those sorts of things. That's not not a part of the scope of this project, but that's where we are.
I would be interested in having more information on a breakdown of what this looks like. Last year, I set an initiative that I did not meet, but I hit most of them. Was able to tour the bulk of our elementary schools. Considering the facility study for how many students we have versus the amount of buildings we have, I want to be very strategic in understanding if this is going to be $750,000, what of that dollars could be used to ensure that rain isn't getting in and really put a stopgap there. I took a tour of RS Payne, and it is gorgeous in that auditorium. But is that going to be the highest and best use of that building moving forward? We don't know yet, and we're waiting for more information from the school board on that front. So I would like a bit more of a breakdown, more than what you've articulated here and in the letter as to that. For clarity, you said these improvements are not related to the recent issue for moving class?
That's right. So the issues over winter break were related to, the power went out, it was really cold, some water lines broke in our HVAC system, And that caused some flooding, that caused some other damage. That has been since repaired, but these photos are not related to that at all. These were prior to that issue.
So they're not related. So when I say I'm asking for more information, it's not because I don't want to support prevent that from happening again. I just want to make that clear.
No, that's great. We can happy to provide
Yeah.
any level of detail that you need.
As far as the security ones, that is certainly something I'm interested in. And then I'd be curious about the structural analysis and repair for those schools, just to get a little bit more understanding, but
Sure thing.
that's not as critical, but certainly with the RS Payne one. But those are my thoughts on this
Absolutely.
presentation thus far.
We'll definitely provide that information, and you know, this is sort of similar, just making sure that the structural cracks that were found during the facility assessment are addressed appropriately before they become worse, right? We want to make sure that we're repairing the buildings to the best extent we possibly can so that they continue to serve the Lynchburg community and don't cause more expensive problems later.
I would finish with a question to our manager. If these funds did not get sent back to the school division, could council take, for example, that $260,000 for those security purposes and allocate them to the school for that purpose, but on our own initiative?
I'm going to have to phone a friend as to so Donna, what would you say to Councilman Feraldi, Vice Mayor Feraldi's question?
You do have 1.2 million sitting in a reserve for contingency in the current budget that could be considered for that.
So we
Or
could,
you could return just that portion.
sure, okay. So we could just return just the 260, for example, if we wanted to do that. Because I think that student safety is certainly something we need to be mindful of in this day and age. So, thank you.
Councilman Taylor?
Well, it looks at these photos, this damage been going on a while.
Yes, sir.
Why hadn't it been addressed?
You know, I can't speak to that necessarily. I just wasn't there. What I will say is that for a very long time, there has been a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance in many of our school buildings, just like in your city buildings. It's been a challenge for a very long time. You know, I know that there's been some sort of smaller attempts to make some repairs. And the scope, and we'll provide you the scope in more detail. But this is a much more in-depth scope than sort of what's been attempted to make repairs.
Yeah, I see mold. That makes kids sick. See that black mold?
Yes, sir, I agree. It's not an acceptable situation, in my view.
Thank you.
Councilman Mischins, did you want to speak?
I think Larry answered it, but I would just be interested in knowing how long has this been deferred?
Sure.
When did this problem first get discovered, and how long has it been going on?
Mayor, may I, Deputy Superintendent, is that right? Reed Wodoka, I've got to get that all out. It's very kind, and what you find, or at least I've found in the year and a half, and this isn't just simply with schools, he mentioned also city buildings. What we do well is we provide capital investment into and build things, but we don't necessarily position maintenance and operation money to maintain those buildings. And so I think annually, we together, Lynchburg City Schools and Lynchburg City, have done the best we can with the resources that are available. And I think helpful for not just simply you, Mr. Taylor, you, Mr. Mischins, is this, and maybe you saw it, I think maybe appropriate at an impending meeting is to go through some of the conversations about the school system. I think if I remember correctly, the average age of our schools are 63 years. And that you know, that's as positioned against other school systems, what have you, that's a pretty long age. And so some of that, again, and I think Dr. Wodoka said it, unacceptable, but I think what it comes down to annually is aged buildings and where those resources can be pulled to make the proper investment when you've got aged infrastructure, and that if your average age of a school is 63 years, then it's really kind of doing what you can to maintain so that you can stay open so you have it for kids. So not a silver bullet answer, maybe not anything that didn't add anything more to this conversation, just wanted you to kind of understand what we wrestle with each. Oh, did I put you on the timer? Sorry about that. But thank you, Mayor, for letting me address you and your peers.
And if I could just add to that, my intent or my goal is to develop a really methodical approach to making sure that we are investing in the right places. The city invested in a facilities assessment report a couple of years ago. We're using that information. Everything we're talking about here is part of that. And we kind of, just as a visual, we kind of think about how do you go from sort of outside the building in, try to fix the things on the outside, fix the things sort of immediately inside, and then start working towards those goals as we go along. And so making sure that we're just having a logical reason by how we develop this plan, we think is really important. And so we're working to develop that right now. And I think this is a great first start.
Councilman Wilder.
Thank you for the information, really appreciate it. I remember we were doing a CIP study some time ago, a couple of years ago, and they looked at all the buildings, like between the schools and the city buildings, and it was like millions and millions of dollars of funds that were needed to do the necessary repairs. So we did a list of things we could kind of tackle. So the city, just so the person to understand, the city does not have all the financial resources to complete all the buildings, to do all the, we've done tours at Sandusky Elementary and saw the conditions of that building and so many others. We just don't have the financial resources to repair all those buildings that need to be repaired. So you have to do a methodical system of how you're going to do what you can, like an elephant, and just taking it a bite at a time. So with our school system and all the other buildings, we do what we can to make sure our children are safe, to make sure our citizens are safe, but we just do not have all the financial resources to do everything that we would love to do that's really even needed to do. But thank you for the information. Appreciate it.
Anyone else? No one else? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Great to
Dr.
see you
Wardick. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Witt. Okay, now we're moving on to item number 3, 1993 letter of agreement between Lynchburg City Council and Lynchburg City Schools. Ms. Donna Witt and Mr. Friedman? Both? Yes?
Yes, City Council requested this item be included on an agenda for discussion on whether the 1993 agreement should continue as written. And City Attorney Matt Friedman, he's going to provide a procedural overview on how this agreement could be modified or discontinued. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of the council. So, as you can see, this agreement has gone on between the school board and the city since 1993. The way it came about, as I understand it, historically, the city had an issue with the school board in trying to discourage frivolous or unnecessary spending, and came up with this agreement and this idea of this unspent amount of monies that wouldn't necessarily have to go back to the city, and that the school could use and encourage them to be frugal and be productive in the way that they spent their monies. Historically, as I understand it, these monies have been used or set aside for infrastructure purposes, for making repairs and other things. And that's kind of really why it exists and how it came about, and it has been ongoing for some time. Now, what that means for this city council is not necessarily that it is bound by this agreement. No city council is bound by previous actions of a previous city council, and same for future city councils. What I would submit is certainly you all have 3 options. You can continue with the agreement as is. You can propose to modify the agreement in some way, to request certain funds be used for certain things or make other modifications, or should you wish, you certainly have the ability to terminate the agreement. What I would submit is if council wants to proceed with option 2 or 3, that is the modification of the termination, it should certainly give written notice by directing myself or Mr. Benda to write a letter to the school board to make them aware of the intentions of city council, and give them an opportunity to be heard on the matter. And then after they've had an opportunity to be heard and you all have had an opportunity to deliberate it, the same way that this was adopted, City Council would adopt a resolution to make the modification or the termination of the agreement. So that's basically what I have on that.
Okay. Council, Vice Mayor Frawley?
I have been on record saying I think it needs to be pulled. I do think there's something to be said for that the school board has requests as to where the money should go. Dialogue is important, but given the numbers that Ms. Witt associated to, especially the last few years, about the average, how much money is left over, I think City Council would be in their right to say we want to revisit where these dollars are best served. As I indicated in our previous item, for me, that might well mean sending that 260 back for security purposes at a school. It may be for another purpose related to education in Lynchburg. It could be offsetting another tax credit of some sorts. I think that's where I tend to lean. So I'm open to an amended version of we welcome their input, but certainly not language that associates we were mandated to then turn around and give the money back. So I lean towards removal unless the school board and council could agree to terms on to what that would look like for moving forward. So for clarity, I lean towards removing it, but certainly would want the input from the school board.
You know, I see these three options, and the option I would lean for is a discontinued option. You know, and there's lots of reasons. You know, this agreement was 30 years ago. And I look at what has happened and transpired over these last 30 years. We just saw some slides of a building that we've had for a long time. Every year, that could have been fixed, because every year they've had, as Donna mentioned, $3.2 million worth of excess revenue that they could have used to fix these things. And the priorities need to be critical. You know, what I've seen over these last 30 years, and Reed had talked about the facility study. The facility studies also showed this unbelievable decline in enrollment. For the last 30 years, there's been like 2,000 less students. When you're seeing 2,000 less students and they have the same number of school buildings, that has been a discussion for almost 20 years that I've been on council, as far as what can you do to consolidate. We have one school that has 169 children in the entire elementary school. That used to be how many were in a specific grade with 5 classes of you know, 5th graders. You got 150 just in 5th graders. You know, now you have the entire school, which went to pre-K and added to that, pre-K 4 and now pre-K 3, and it's still this huge decline. The day is different from 30 years ago. Now I would say if we've had buildings that were impeccable and they wouldn't come up and pick which one that they can show some pictures of with the black mold like you saw because they delayed on it or put something else in a priority ahead of time, that may be a different story. But you look over these last 30 years, we've not only had a huge decline in the enrollment, the operating budget has grown tremendously. I've seen that operating budget grow tremendously with less students. Now, if you look and say, okay, let's just look big picture, you gave them more money because inflation, even though you had less students, but the results are better. Oh, man, I remember 20 years ago, a lot of the people that graduated from EC Glass, I mean, it was a stellar school. It was in the top 10 in the country, top 10% rather in the country. Now we're looking at those ratings are a 1 and a 2, which is sad. It's very sad. So I'm looking at the money that is spent. I'm looking at some of the age of the buildings, and I'm also just reflecting on the brand new superintendent right when she first got here. I don't know, I guess it's not brand new anymore. It's probably been 3 or 4 years. 3 or 4 years. Oh, Jeff, remember when we came up with that plan to have a committee that was going to look at the schools and figure out what we can do to consolidate? Oh, they were going to do it. Well, then we disbanded the committee. Then the school board said, the school administration said, we're going to tackle redistricting. We're going to tackle this. That's been 3 or 4 years ago. So lots of time, lots of opportunity. I recognize there's going to be needs, and I do believe that rather than giving them carte blanche, saying, hey, whatever's left you get to keep and spend it however you see fit, we're going to actually look at it a little more judiciously. So we'll say, I'd say let's discontinue the agreement from 30 years ago, because it's a new day. It is a new day. 30 years ago, now if there's specific needs, if there's specific requests that actually say, yes, we need to do this. I'm looking later in our session tonight when we're looking at a new bond issue. There's another, what, $4, $5, $6 million bucks? More school stuff? more school spending, more roofs on this school and that school and this one and that one. We're fixing buildings that we've never really said, how many buildings do we need when we lose 2,000 kids? You guys came from Norfolk. They've closed schools. Other places, they consolidate. Bedford County, for crying out loud, has 800 square miles, and they've closed elementary schools. We're 50 square miles. One student can go past 3 elementary schools on the way to their elementary school, but they haven't redistricted. That is critical, that we actually redistrict before we just say, here's all this money to fix up buildings, fixing up buildings that may not have a pattern that says, we're going to keep these buildings as schools, because schools that have 169 kids in the entire school are typically, I think the normal is about 500 is the average. So I'm in favor of us discontinuing this agreement. Obviously, after that time, just like a normal budget process, schools can come forward and ask and say, hey, we need this. Or as Donna's going to be presenting later tonight, a new budget package or a general obligation bond package that says, here are some things that we actually need to do. I think it needs to be strategic and collective, because enough of the resources, because these resources don't grow on trees, they come from our taxpayers who have been highly taxed. I think we can demand a little bit more accountability by saying, hey, when you have a specific item, we'll actually look at that specific item. If it makes sense, great, we'll do it, because we own the buildings. So that's where I stand on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilman Wilder? Oh. Oh, okay. Councilman, questions?
I just want to make sure that it's clear that my desire is to ensure that local government is fiscally responsible, as well as Lynchburg City Schools. And I think I kind of along the lines agree with what Jeff said, that we should be repealing this agreement. The oversight responsibility of City Council is important to ensure that our citizens are properly represented and that accountability exists for their tax dollars. And those tax dollars fund both this municipal corporation and Lynchburg City Schools. So it doesn't mean that we won't make future decisions to return those unspent dollars to the school system, but it does mean that it's not going to be automatic. So I'm leaning towards what Jeff said. It's a new day in Lynchburg. We have fiscal conservatives in charge, and I want to make sure that every citizen dollar spent is necessary from now on.
Councilman Wilder?
Yes, I'm in favor of leaving the agreement the way it is, mainly because those buildings are the city buildings. And we just talked about issues that they need to have done that they don't have the resources for. And every time that they have those funds that are returned, they're always using those funds for building infrastructure, for buses, for things that are needed. We want to make sure our kids are safe when they come to school on the bus. We want to make sure the bus has the proper equipment and the proper inspections. If they have to purchase certain equipment that needed to make sure they get there safely. In the buildings, they have so many needs that they have, and those fund balance information is for one-time expenditures, that if they didn't spend it, there are buildings, we would have to spend it regardless. So we appoint a school board to make certain decisions. So we need to be able to trust the school board to be appointed to make the proper decisions, to use those one-time expenses to make sure that our schools are running more efficiently, our buildings are safe for the children. We talk about supporting education. We talk about supporting our children. But then one of the first actions we want to do is take money from the children, take money from education. 20 years ago, things were different. 20 years ago, the classrooms now are smaller. They receive certain federal funding for certain small teacher ratio size certain classrooms. So some classrooms are smaller. You didn't have as much special education. You didn't have as much poverty. We have one of the highest poverties in our area. When you have higher poverty in other situations, trying to teach kids, but mainly from single-family homes, you have more issues that resolve from that. You have different, you say there are more spaces, but then there's need for computer labs, there's need for other teaching instructions, there's need for day treatment programs. It has changed drastically over the past 20 years. So I support in leaving the agreement the way it is and let the school board that we appoint make those decisions for those funds that are one-time expenses that go to mainly the infrastructure of those buildings to make sure our buildings are safe. Thank you.
Yes, Councilwoman Dolan?
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't really think we should penalize the school board or the school system for being frugal with their money, and I think that the city does own the buildings. I think the money historically that they've had surplus in excess of, they have used very reasonably. Now, granted, there are many, many buildings here who need repair, but that's because they haven't had the resources available to them. I mean, this will just really put a further cringe in their ability to be able to do things. I mean, certainly, I can't fault them for wanting to increase their health insurance reserves. So where are they going to get this money if it's not left over from money that they didn't use the prior year? I just think it's very important that they do the maintenance that they need to do on these buildings. I think they know the buildings better than anybody sitting up here knows the buildings and what the needs are of the school. And I don't think I want to be making that decision for them. You know, if I were the school board, I probably wouldn't have a surplus if the agreement's terminated. I'd make sure I spent every dollar I had.
Vice Mayor Feraldi?
Briefly, I think Councilmember Dolan raises some fair points. I would be remiss if I did not mention however many millions, tens of millions of ARPA money that the school division, I believe, has had and sent to their coffers that could have, by my understanding, been used for infrastructure projects to accommodate some of these things. And there were other things that were chosen over this one specifically. So I don't want to belabor the point, but just for the record and those folks who are going to report on this later this evening, wanted to make that known. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Witt and Mr. Friedman. I appreciate it. Moving on to item number 4, Lynchburg Municipal Employees Federal Credit Union Extension of Agreement Lease. This item will appear before council for action on February 14th, 2023. Ms. Gaynell Hart.
Mayor, one quick
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hudson.
So we talked about this, and I understand it's under the business item briefings, but the summary is Mr. Friedman has said, hey, whatever way you're going to go. So decide just how we're going to go is going to be a function of the documents you prepare. You mentioned that to tell the city attorney and city manager which direction we're going to go. We normally tell you by via a vote rather than just sitting up here, talking. So with that being the case, at some point, I know you've heard our concerns right now. You've heard from what everybody is saying. Are you going to have some documentation for us this evening? You're going to have some documentation for us next meeting? Or do you want us to give you direction right now?
Councilmember Helgeson, from what I can tell, it doesn't sound like there's any particular majority leaning one way or the other. What I would suggest, and I haven't kept up with the meetings as best as I should have, this may be something that could be discussed with the school board at a meeting at a later date, and that might be a good place to start in order to get a majority to go in a particular direction.
Either that, if those of you would like, I could make a motion, we could show you the majority today, if that would be. I don't want to be accused of doing something nefarious, but I think we've all kind of talked. Are we in favor of a motion or today, or you want one in?
I would offer, with respect to the tradition of lack of motions in work sessions, I would just ask those who haven't expressed insight maybe to offer it, and then I believe you have consensus, or not consensus, but you have a direction from the 5 of us who may have a difference of opinion as opposed to Mr. Wilder and Ms. Dolan.
So I guess that would be Madam Mayor.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I'm not, from what I've heard, it doesn't sound like there's a majority to terminate the agreement.
All I heard is 2 that wanted to keep it as is.
And I heard 1 modification and 2 terminate.
If I may interject, I'm fine with termination. I'm also fine with amending it so that way it's not required. But if terminating it is the way to go too, I'm also okay with that. So.
Mr. Bennett?
Mayor, what I'd offer is that by way of procedure, Councilman Hegelson's question, we would position this for your vote on the next meeting, which is February 14th. That's the scheduled meeting. You have a retreat on the 10th. That might provide some opportunity there to give you a little bit more feedback. I think there's some questions about the projects. So that would be, in my opinion, the date specific that we would have it. And procedurally, I think depending on where people are going, the only thing I'd say, and I have to think through this with Ms. Witt, Vice Mayor, your conversation about security and a piece of it, that if you do repeal the 1993 amendment, so if that were the first thing on the docket, that would then have an impact, because that then means that those resources would then go to unassigned fund balance, not assigned. So then it would be kind of that discretionary area. Then you can then decide, if I'm tracking back to the question that you ultimately phoned a friend. So procedurally, to answer your question, I would work with the city attorney, but because there is the potential of an appropriation, it would take two times to vote on something. So just for purposes here, we could position it for the 14th. So both items, what I hear, or at least in working with Mr. Freeman, or at least what I understand, there's an interest to repeal the 1993 agreement, correct?
Yes.
And then if that were the case, procedurally, and I appeal to Donna and to Mr. Freeman, I think that then has an impact on those resources and those monies. Because then effectively, in having a sidebar conversation, it would move from an assigned fund balance to an unassigned, and that would be the number. That would then give you the opportunity to have subsequent conversations about how that those monies then are spent. That could be in your fiscal 24 budget, adoption process. That's, I think, in listening just collectively to where things are, that's, in my opinion, a path that we can take if that's amenable to Mayor and your peers.
Just for clarification, the way it's set up right now with the agreement in place, it would only require one vote from us to appropriate those monies that they requested, or still two?
Still two.
Still two. If the agreement is repealed, it would take 2 votes to appropriate those monies for those items if they requested them from the unassigned general fund balance.
I'm shaking my head yes, and I'll just look over my shoulder to make sure, yeah.
So it doesn't procedurally change anything. Essentially, they could come and ask for those as individual asks to us after the agreement was repealed, or whether the agreement is not repealed.
That could be one means, but I offer that if we go back to the history that Donna had said, I think originally it was, and maybe it was Councilmember Dolan, there was a concern in the early 90s that precipitated this, that maybe the schools to spin down what they had quickly enough resulted or precipitated this agreement. And so candidly, I don't know what that would then mean for them financially as far as respect to their monies. Right now, you've got something that at least is a gauge, if you will, that you revisit, although that you're not bound by it, that you revisit annually. So,
I mean, it's my hope that the school system wouldn't retaliate against the taxpayers by wasting money.
and I'm not positioning that at all. I'm just kind of saying historically why the thing was in place, and just giving you kind of an answer to what I think is your question. I hope I got a good answer.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no problem.
City Council, just one question to follow up with that. So if council's going to revisit on the 14th, whether to repeal or modify the 1993 agreement, do you all want me to send a letter on behalf of my office to Dr. Coleman and the superintendent advising them of the same, that this is going to be revisited for modification or possibly cancellation?
I think the easy thing would be is once we actually vote on it, say, hey, let's repeal it. We can vote on it today and send the letter, or we can wait till the 14th. Once we say we're repealing this agreement and send them the letter saying it's repealed, this is the process. Well, and two, as you know, I recognize what's happened before those 30 years ago. I certainly would hope that we wouldn't have school board members, as Councilmember Dolan suggested, that they would just, at the end of the year, just spend all the money. I mean, my goodness. I mean, that's why we need school board members that are actually going to recognize this money doesn't just grow on trees. It's taxpayers' money. Let's use it as efficiently as we can for improving education for our children. And if we have it just to spend, we need different school board members, let me tell you. I don't think those are on there now, so I would trust that they wouldn't just, if we repealed this, that they would just at the end of the year just say, hey, let's have a major Christmas bash or something and blow the money. So
Councilmember Wilder and then Councilwoman Dolan.
I would like to have a list of, over the past several years, what the fund balance has been used for. So we can see, I want the parents to see, you have children in the school system. This is what the fund balance has been for fixing buildings, for buses, so you understand that we want to make sure your children are safe. But now we want to say we want to revisit that. We don't trust them enough to handle these funds. We want to tell them what to do. We want to, the people that we have appointed, we want to tell them exactly what to do. So I think we need to at least see, so the parents can see what those fund balances have been for, and then we can have a better understanding of what those funds have been used for over the past several years. Thank you.
No, that was what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. So you're good?
I'm good.
Okay, Vice Chair Feraldi?
I guess if we can bring this to a point.
Yes.
I believe the 14th is fine. I'm comfortable with moving forward with pulling it back and removing it. Yeah, I don't know what else needs to be offered. And with respect to, we don't typically do motions at roll call, motions at work sessions. I'm comfortable moving that direction. I believe you have 3 folks who have indicated as such. I'd be shocked if the other 2 would not, but that's just trying to keep us moving forward.
And Madam Mayor, I keep, I don't mean to belabor this issue,
Yes.
but as I'd said in my briefing, the idea is to give notice to the school board. So I keep mentioning that because while this council certainly is within its rights to repeal or modify the agreement, again, I'll ask, do you all want me to send a letter to them making them aware of it so they can come in to be heard?
So logistically, we haven't taken an action, and we're also trying to respect the fact that work sessions, you don't take up votes. So with that understanding, why would you send notification if we haven't acted yet?
Because you would potentially act on the 14th because it would no longer be in work session.
They were just here today because we actually potentially acted on the item that we just had, which was dealing with that very item. So they were here a second ago.
City Council, I don't have to send it. I just advise.
I got a feeling they're watching, let me tell you. I mean, they're, so.
Okay, so point of order. Oh, sorry, Councilwoman Dolan.
I just think in the interest of maintaining good relationships with the school board, I think this would be a prudent thing to do.
So I guess, can I ask a question then?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so my question is, if we want it on the agenda for the 14th, what is the procedure at this point?
What I would suggest is certainly it can go on the agenda for a vote with a resolution, but I would submit, because it's an agreement, you want to give notice
Okay.
to the party, to the other party to the agreement, so they have an opportunity to respond in some way.
Okay,
But it's not going to be a public hearing.
so what steps do you need us to take at this point?
Then, but just a consensus direction, if everyone is good with a letter coming from my office to tell them it'll be up for a vote, I can certainly do that.
Repeal, yeah.
Okay. Okay, all right.
That agreement for repeal.
So now we can move on. Thank you. All right. Ms. Hart, thank you for being patient.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, my purpose here tonight is to talk to you about extending the agreement with the Lynchburg Federal Credit Union. It's located on city stadium property. This will return to you on February 14th for formal action. The agreement was originally executed in October 1999. Again, the credit union is housed in the caretaker's house located on city stadium property. The credit union is owned and operated by its members, and their members include city staff, school staff, constitutional officers, and other select member groups. The lease has been on a month-to-month since October 2019, and we desire to extend it formally for a period of 5 years, so that would take it through December 2028. And that concludes my report.
Ms. Hart, any questions for anybody? No? Okay, thank you so much. All right, moving on to roll call. Councilman Wilder.
Okay. I would like to thank the Martin Luther King Council for the wonderful breakfast they had at the Virginian with the historical person who was one of the first African Americans to integrate East Glass High School. Her speech was very moving, and she currently owns the Journal and Guide. It's Journal and Guide, I believe, the newspaper. from Norfolk. I used to be a carrier, a paper boy when I was about 12 for that newspaper. So it brought back a lot of old memories. But again, thankful for the committee, all the committee members that participated in that Martin Luther King Council's breakfast. It's so important for us to, remember his contributions and also where we've come from and also where we need to go. It's been a society where so many things are happening and changing, but the only way we can be better is by we show the love of our Savior, our Father, so we continue to show love and love for one another, love for all mankind. And that was some of the principles that he stood for, be a servant. So we continue to have a service heart. We can change our community and make our community so much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Weiler. Councilwoman Dolan? Okay. Councilman Helgeson, actually, I want to say happy birthday to you also.
Well, yes, it is. And man, I can't wait till tonight. Normally at birthday presents, people are getting something. This is going to be the best birthday ever we could to give to all of our 82,000 citizens, hopefully. But regarding my roll call item, just last week, Liberty University started back in school. And man, is it something. The restaurants love it. The hotels love it. The city coffers love it. When you're filling up all those tourists that are coming in, the employees that are out being back at working at the restaurants, it's fantastic when they come back. It's nice in the summer, those of us who've been here a lot and we like to go to Sam's Club and whatnot. It's kind of nice in the summer to be able to get down there fairly easy, but once they're back, it's invigorating, and all the schools that have come back after the Christmas break is nice. The school is having a record enrollment this year. Fantastic. It's grown so much that we have to even have classes outside of the business school because the business school has grown so much. So it is nice to see them back, and I appreciate this time of year, even though it's cold. It warms my heart to see them back. So that's it.
That's all?
That is
Okay,
all.
well,
I can do some more if you want.
No, that's great. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Okay, we are moving on to Councilman Mischins. I believe that you have an item for discussion.
I do. So Lynchburg City Schools recently adopted a policy regarding identification of sexually explicit instructional materials and the responsibility for parental notification. That was in response to a change in Virginia law. Overall, I think it's an excellent policy, and I applaud them for putting that together, but I think it can be stronger. I campaigned on empowering parents over their children's education and protecting the innocence of our children in schools. It's also within the purview of City Council to, when appropriate, make recommendations to the school board on issues related to the operation of public schools, just as my colleague and former mayor, Mary Jane Dolan, did on August 3rd, 2020 in a COVID-19 news conference when she called for Lynchburg City Schools to not return to in-person learning. The next day, the school board voted to depart from their original plan, and all K-12 students in Lynchburg City Schools started the school year remotely. Mary Jane did that on her own as mayor without a majority vote from City Council, and had quite the impact on our school system, from tremendous learning loss for our children to families permanently leaving Lynchburg City Schools and even moving out of the city. What I'm seeking today is a majority consensus from my colleagues to strengthen this new policy. It's well within our purview to do that, and ensure parents' rights are a top responsibility of our school board alongside protecting the precious children of our community. Those in opposition to this measure are going to tell you that it's about book banning or censorship, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm not asking for any instructional materials to be removed. I'm simply asking the school system to use a time-honored tradition of requesting permission from parents instead of relying on implied consent to share material with minors that may contain, and this is right out of the policy, bestiality, lewd exhibitions of nudity, sexual excitement or sexual conduct, sadomasochistic abuse, coprophilia, or urophilia. And I'll warn you, if you look up the definition of those last two, you're going to be alarmed, because I was. I've spoken with both LCS teachers and parents since I've made this stand. This isn't about creating an additional administrative headache for teachers or staff. It's about giving the parents all the information up front, on the front end, like a menu, and they can choose what is acceptable for their child and what is not. It may be all, it may be some, or it may be none. The most alarming thing that I've come across in my research is what I've learned that some of these materials in our public schools contain. On the topic of sexual exploration, for example, about how sex apps work, in a quote, right? I'll paraphrase what the book said. Upload your picture, enable location services. The app puts you in touch with people nearby, chat with people near you, and because they are near, it's easy to meet them in person. That's a recipe for disaster. There's absolutely no excuse for this book to be in the hands of a minor without expressed parental consent or opt-in. In 2018, the NIH recognized that the use of smartphone dating apps has significantly created an emerging risk factor for sexual abuse. It's common knowledge that sexual predators use these applications to find and exploit minors. I cannot, in good conscience, have this knowledge about the risk of pedophiles preying on our precious community's children and not speak out on it. When taxpayer-funded material exists in our schools that would encourage and teach minors how to use these very apps that make them vulnerable to exploitation, implied consent simply does not cut it for me, many parents, and even staff in our schools. So I ask my colleagues, are you prepared to take a stand and ask the school board to strengthen this policy which will actually empower parents and protect the innocence of the children in our community? I know I will. And if we prevent one child from getting exploited by a predator or even trafficked, like recently happened in Appomattox County with a local teenager, it was worth taking this stand. I know I wouldn't want to be the council member without my signature on this letter. So I have the letter here. I've already signed it, and I'll be passing it along the dais. And I would ask that after we receive these signatures, that you would transmit that to the school board.
Thank you, Councilman Mischens. Okay, Councilman Taylor.
Yes, I would just like to thank our law enforcement community for the great job they've done in the last couple of weeks. We had several shootings in Lynchburg. The predators was apprehended, and they just didn't go away. We were able to arrest them. And I'd like to thank our law enforcement community, this young man back here, for a great job.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you. Vice Mayor Feraldi.
I do wish I could have joined my colleagues at the MLK Commission. Work occupied me, so I do want to share regrets for not being able to attend that. Had a question about, and of course, right when I searched it, it went away. There's an interesting social media account on Twitter, and it's caught my attention on multiple fronts. And it's really intriguing. And one of the things that it brought to my attention was about the intersection of Jubal Street and Lakeside Drive, and the entrance issues, visibility, and lane painting, if you will, the things associated there. And apparently the crash rate may not be that great or really good, depending on whichever way you're looking at the data. If we could look at that, or if I could get some info on that, that'd be helpful.
Will you say the intersection again, please?
Jubal Street and Lakeside. It is a little funky. The individual requested that we remove the entrance. I'm no traffic engineer, so I don't know how all that works, but more information on that would be helpful. The second item I had, I've gotten multiple requests about the Billings window being closed. If we can get a little bit more of a breakdown of what you all might need to ensure that's there, because I have had some folks reach out to me and, why is this closed? It doesn't have a great look or feel.
Can you say that? My ears are a little stuck.
That's all right. The Billings window, the staffing at the
Billings. I got
Billings.
it. Not building. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's okay. Go ahead.
To answer that, just it is a staffing issue that we're kind of wrestling with, and we hope it's a short period of time, and we're doing our best with kind of the technology that we have. We too want to greet our patrons at those windows. We're having staffing issues, the simplest that I could put it, and so that's why we have the technology outside. We've done or did fairly well in COVID through remote transactions, what have you, but it is currently just a staffing issue. And Donna's no longer behind me. She could have helped support me in it, but I too want to make sure that we have a forward-facing person there, and it's just we cannot get the talent right now
I'm sure.
to staff that window.
Still, information as to what
Absolutely.
that would do to help would be great. I want to commend Councilmember Mischins for this initiative. I have taken an initiative on my part to put something in writing to the school division on this front, and truly believe that engaging them in the manner in which I did should hopefully prove fruitful. I requested the same request, that this be more of a conversation about flipping the way the policy works. It's my understanding the policy at present says you have to go to the school as a parent to change how your student engages. Well, that's a lot of extra burden on the parent to do this, and I don't think that's right. I did kind of chuckle at the connection between a field trip, I believe is the terminology used, and how this would work. They're in conflict with each other. So all to say, I have communicated that. I did so a few days ago in writing, and I'm hopeful that the school board will revisit it. I do have correspondence indicating that they will revisit this, and so that's what I wanted to communicate on this particular topic. I don't want to position items in terms of, I'll be candid, gotchas or told you so's or you didn't sign this because, and so that's why I took initiative to get ahead of this meeting and say simply, this needs to be addressed, but do so in my own words on behalf of the constituents I represent. So I stand by this letter, and I stand by what I communicated to the school division.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Farrell.
Pass it. I'm ready to sign it whenever I get it. So.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Faraldi. And thank you again to Councilman Mischins for articulating his feelings on this issue. So, yeah, we've gotten a lot of emails from a lot of people that have these concerns, and we've read them all, and we have people that have different opinions. And, I talked to tons of parents over the summer who had grave concerns about their voices being heard at the schools, and their concerns about what their children were learning. And thank you. And so when I heard about this policy last week and was asked about it, I wanted to make sure that I understood it fully myself before I answered any questions. And I've talked to many of you about my desire in the city to make sure we have good relationships with those who we are working with. And I have been working hard to establish relationships of my own so that I can attempt to do that. Last week, I had a meeting with our superintendent. I had a meeting with our chair and vice chair of the school board in an attempt to start building that relationship. Coincidentally, when this all came up, which was actually perfect timing, and I believe I was asked by the media my thought about this specific policy, and I did not want to comment on it at that time because I wanted those conversations to take place organically, and I wanted to be able to answer once I had kind of a full, I was educated on the policy and then had these conversations so I could get here tonight and be able to answer. I had some really great conversations with the chair and vice chair of the school board. First of all, I respect the fact that the school board is its own entity, just like the council is, and that we cannot order them to do anything. But as it was just referenced, we do represent the citizens of Lynchburg, and I take every email that we get very seriously. And we got a lot of emails from some very concerned parents. And so when I reached out to the chair and vice chair of the school board and spoke to them, they understood my concerns. I'm a mother myself, but also I said, hey, we have some concerned citizens, and here's what they're saying. So they listened, they heard, they understood the concern. They had received the correspondence from the vice mayor, so they understood what the intent was and why there was an interest of turning kind of the approach of the policy around to giving a more proactive approach to the parents, giving them more control over it. Certainly anything that has to do with sexuality, parents should have more control over, and they understood that. And so I received an email today from Dr. Coleman, the chair of the school board, and he said, you know, he wanted me to pass on that we are absolutely committed to working with each individual parent regarding concerns pertaining to their children. And he said that the school board is happy to revisit this policy and that they want to hear from the parents. He gave several different avenues that the parents can follow up with the school board. Superintendent's Parent Advisory Council, Equity Task Force, Health Advisory Board, Special Education Advisory Committee. They can email the school board, they can call the school board. It is absolutely the right thing to do as a parent that you directly contact them. He has said that here. So I want you to know, we've heard your concerns, we understand them, and now you have been directed to go to the school board yourself and let them know that you have this concern, and they're willing to listen to you, and they have agreed to revisit the policy. So I just want to make sure that that's understood. We all can write our own letters. Every other parent in the city can go and write their letters. So I just want to make sure you know that we are taking it very seriously. We have, but I also want to make sure you know that we are respecting that the school board is its own entity, and they have an operating procedure that they run the same way that we do. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that, and that's all we have for. I'm sorry. I need to close the meeting.
Go to the closed meeting.
Sorry. We have to make a motion to go into closed meeting now.
Actually got some discussion on that item.
Discussion on what item? On
Just
my-
the item that you just discussed. I mean,
Well,
normally
it's
that
roll
was.
call.
Well, it was a roll call item that he made, but you made it into a discussion point. And so now it is a.
Point of order. That was my roll call.
So at this point, City Council, we would, certainly the mayor has the discretion to be able to recognize additional speakers, but if she is ruling additional speakers out of order at this point, the proper course of action would be to continue on with the agenda. Everyone has had a chance, as I understand it, to speak to their roll call
No,
item.
two people haven't. No, we haven't to this issue that became an issue, so we both protest.
All right, well, what I would submit then, it is in the discretion of the mayor to make the choice as to whether to go back. This isn't a motion on the table. This is only roll call to bring up matters of concern that are currently before City Council, each individually to City Council. It's not a forum of debate.
May I have a motion to go into closed meeting?
Second.
I've moved for.
Thank you.
I
Okay.
guess before that.
Cast your vote, please.
I actually object to that under our rules of procedure from the parliamentary rules. I know I protest her rule. So that goes to the parliamentarian per our rules of procedure. We have two people that haven't spoke to an issue that was originally kind of by itself, until back-to-back people spoke to that very issue.
So with an appeal to,
Is the appeal in order since we have a motion and second?
the appeal is in order to the point of order. So what would happen at this point is council as a whole needs to make a vote, no more further discussion as to whether the additional individuals be permitted to speak over the presiding officer's ruling.
And can we talk about why we want to appeal?
No,
Okay.
it would go straight to a vote to allow you all to speak as part of the roll call process.
Yeah, I mean, geez. I mean, you didn't get to rebut. I mean, I know you want to rebut. So what do we do?
You vote yes to be
Yes
able
to
to
appeal.
speak,
Yep.
or no to not speak.
So green is to speak.
What is the motion again?
To appeal, so Mary Jane and I can speak to an issue that we didn't get to speak to.
Didn't they have opportunity to speak to it? They knew it was on the agenda.
The appeal is there, the votes, what's happening with the vote?
All right, so the majority of councils decided to allow you all to speak as part of the roll call process. So Madam Mayor, at this point, in the order of which they asked for the ability to speak, you would recognize them to be able to say their piece.
Councilman Dolan?
Okay, well, I really wanted to speak to this just to explain why I am not going to sign Councilmember Michigan's letter, and didn't have that opportunity. And the real reason is that opting in censors the learning opportunities for every student, whereas opt-out gives students the opportunity to access the material. For opt-in, only children who, A, get the form, bring it home to their parents, B, have the parents read it and sign the form, C, get it back to the school. We'll have an opportunity to learn that these 3 steps, think of how many times parents never get the form to begin with. These 3 steps are assuming that children are able to get the form home. There are kids who probably have disabilities and are not able to process and get things home, and I think that this is really limiting. I think that this needs to be maybe fine-tuned a little bit, but I do really feel that the opt-in is, it's also a mistrust of the whole education system, which is a whole other issue, but my primary reason is getting the form home to the parents and getting it signed. I can tell you how many times my kids, when they were growing up, never got the form to me, and I was with my kids all the time. That's my first issue. My second issue, I just want to take a moment to talk about Councilmember Michigan's comment about having the schools closed. That is a blatant lie. I never had the schools closed during COVID. I never had that authority, and I never even suggested that. So I want you to provide documentation for the public. Thank you.
Pardon? Oh, well, Councilman Helgeson was next, I believe.
I guess since this was addressed to her, I would yield if there is, I mean, since it went back and forth, it was to a person that was named, so.
15 seconds, Madam Mayor.
Councilman Missions.
I think the important thing here is that we're looking at the safety of our children, so we need to do whatever that means. I'm just not convinced that we need to put kids back in school right now.
Well, that is not telling the schools to close. That's an opinion.
Okay, Councilman Helgeson.
Thank you. And the reason why, when I see this, I guess, as Mary Jane just stated, that sometimes the parents don't get the form. That's the exact reason why you opt in, rather than getting a form to opt out. If you don't give them the form, and there it's actually, you're automatically in, unless your parents actually get the form. So to me, that's the reason that says, hey, give the form. And two, I recognize lots of times people are kind of saying, well, who came up with this idea? Sadly, Ronald Reagan said it best. He said it'd be amazing what could be done if we didn't worry about who gets the credit. I'm very thankful that Councilmember Mischins brought this up. His wife is a school teacher. His kids go to the schools, very well connected, heard from lots of folks that understand how critical this is. And you presented it in a fashion that wasn't demeaning or belittling. It's a fashion that says, hey, schools, we appreciate what you've done with the policy. Great, thankfully. We think maybe we can do it a little bit better. And a little bit better doesn't take away their authority, of course not. What this letter is doing, or even if we make a motion later tonight to adopt this and actually say, hey, we agree, a majority agrees that we think this is critical, that you revisit that. I'm thankful that they are. Here is what we think. Here is what we think as the people that have been elected by the citizens that overwhelmingly came out and said, we care about parents' rights. Made it happen last November with the governor, came with this November with council campaigning on schools need to listen to parents. The parents, when you look at the Virginia code, they're empowered for the education of their own children. It's not overstepping anybody's toes. It's not changing the method, because obviously schools are going to listen to whoever they want to. They can have public hearings on it. It's this body who actually appointed those folks that are managing the budget, that are actually running the school system. It's us collectively saying, hey, we care about our kids. We care about parents' rights. We appreciate your policy, but we'd like you to have it opt in so this form isn't just lost somewhere and all of a sudden the 5-year-old, 7-year-old is getting taught something that they don't want to get taught. And quite frankly, lots of teachers, this isn't about teachers, quite frankly. I mean, the teachers, the good teachers, they aren't teaching this stuff. The good teachers are teaching them to read, to write, do arithmetic, do science and history. They're actually trying to improve their SOL scores. They're not monkeying with this. There's no time in the curricula to actually focus on sexualization of children. I mean, that's not curricula. There's no benefit to having that in the curricula. You want to have good citizens. It doesn't mean anything. So I'd gladly sign this, and if we don't want to sign the letter, maybe we just need to have a motion later this evening that can actually just have a vote on it. I signed it. I'm glad the other two council members did. Hopefully the rest of us will. This isn't a who came up with it. It's a great thing, and I love it, and I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful to support it, and because I tell you what, these kids, I've had a little brother that was grew up in the school system. I've had a great education in my day. I've seen lots of kids have fantastic education. I'd like to preserve that. Opting in is a very good way. The school board is obviously in your communications with them. They're open. They're thinking about it. They're saying, yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's put a little more weight and say, here, we agree with this. Maybe that'll help them move a little further down the path. So I'm glad to support this. Hope everybody else does as well.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, I do want to add one thing as to the letter. The letter, unless there's official council action, would not be an action on behalf of City Council. So certainly anyone who joins in that letter, it would be an individual joining irrespective of the fact that the letterhead itself shows it's on behalf of City Council. Because there's not official action, that is the way I would interpret that letter.
Let me ask a question then.
Yes, ma'am.
I believe you sent out an email this week regarding how this would actually have to be written and signed, correct?
That's correct.
And it would be signed by the mayor.
So if there was official action, typically a letter on behalf of the City Council would be signed, Council of the City of Lynchburg, Virginia, by its mayor.
Correct. So then there's the opportunity to modify the wording of the letter if it's something that would be written by the mayor originally and then signed below.
Well, should City Council adopt it as a
Correct.
governing body?
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
So before we end this, can we, like later this evening, could we amend the agenda to have this on the agenda for this evening? I'll ask for that amendment for this evening, that we vote on this then in the evening.
Madam Mayor,
Vice Mayor Feraldi.
I'm happy to entertain the discussion, but I'm not happy to entertain the, down to the minutia of the draft for the letter itself.
Okay.
In other words, I'm happy to consider it this evening and make a vote of a public stance of Lynchburg City Council, but I believe you should leave the verbiage
Okay.
and messaging associated to the office holder who communicates on behalf of council, and that would be the mayor.
Okay. So is someone going to make a motion then?
Now we're going to close session.
Okay, may I have a motion to go into closed meeting?
So moved.
Okay, any discussion? Cast your vote, please.
Just one quick question on that closed session. Mr. Friedman,
Yes.
if I'm not going to be able to come to the closed session, I've done this before, is I can vote to go into closed session and then leave, or would it be better for me to?
You can certainly vote to go into closed
Okay,
session
good,
because
thank
you're
you.
here. You
But
just
then
wouldn't be able
leave.
to certify.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, cast your vote, please.
That was a
Madam
quick
Mayor,
question.
before you cast your vote, I do need to read the language in open session, just
Oh,
so we know.
sorry.
Consideration of a closed meeting for the purpose of a briefing by staff to the Council on Public Safety and Vulnerability pursuant to Section 2.2, 3711A19 of the Code of Virginia, 1950, as amended. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is so moved.
Yes. Now you can vote.
Councilor Taylor.
Oh, we already got a second. Someone has a second.
Councilor Taylor, cast your vote. Cast your vote.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hold on.
Did everybody vote?
There you go.
Yeah, there we go.